Hey everyone, welcome back to Great Northwest Weaponry. This is Thomas, and today we're taking a look at my newest acquisition and one of the coolest guns I own in my opinion, Enfield manufactured Webley Mark 6. This is iconic handgun. Most people are aware of what a Webley is. Webley served the British Empire from 1887 to, I believe it was 1863. If I have that wrong, as usual, I'll post a correction. But the Mark 6 in particular was officially adopted from 1915 until 1923, I believe. This gun is manufactured in 1924, but it is covered in all the proper markings for British military acceptance. And a side note to that, though they only officially served until 23, officers or soldiers even could buy their own handgun from any of the approved factories pretty much all the way up through World War II. So these guns were very popular among British officers, in particular. In the First World War, the British didn't really arm their troops with combined arms. It wasn't like you had your revolver and your rifle like we crazy Americans did in World War I. That was kind of considered a thing that was like distinctly American, was combined arms. It wasn't very commonly practiced by the European powers. But this thing is awesome. I'm really happy about it. If you watch the show Peaky Blinders, Webleys are all over that show, and I've been watching that for a bit, and it is so cool. I love the break top. That's one of my favorite revolver features, or I guess mechanisms is the right word. One thing, in the First World War, it was considered to be impractical to use this outside of your own trenches if you did not have what was called the Purdue device, I believe is how it's said. I'll show you how it's spelled, because it's really bizarre. It's a French word designed by a French dude, and it's basically just a speed loader, and you can get modern 45 speed loaders that will work for the 455 Webley cartridge, but if finding an original Purdue device, I found one, and it was like $20,000. They're not attainable. They're strictly a collector's item. Not very many of them were ever made, but it was considered an essential for trench warfare. So like if you were going over the trenches and attacking the Germans in World War I, you wanted to have the Purdue device, because this gun holds 6 shots. It's a revolver, 6 shots is normal. The British rifles of World War I held 10 shots, so this was considered a substandard weapon if you did not have that device. But it hits like a truck. 455 Webley is not called a man-stopper round for no reason. It's a 45, and it's a heavy 45. The ammo I've been using for this is the Steinel ammo, 200. I think it's 265 grain. It's monstrous. It's just a big old beefy round that you're flinging downrange. So let's go ahead and stick this thing on the table and take a closer look. So one thing you'll notice about the British and their guns is they absolutely love markings. They are absolutely covered, these guns, in markings. So quick note, and you're probably already aware of this, but a very common practice in the U.S. When these flooded the markets in the U.S. in the 50s, and shaving this for 45 auto was very common. Now, this is a shame that it happened, but you know, it is what it is. This right here is a 455 Webley, and you see that it's rimmed, and that's what stops it from getting stuck in the gun. This is 45 auto. It's a little longer, the 45 auto is, but you'll notice when you drop it in, it actually sits pretty far down in there without protruding out the other side. So the idea is you'd use moon clips or half moon clips, such as in the 1917 revolvers, once the cylinder had been shaved. Now, I had mentioned that this one was made by Enfield. You can see that clearly marked here, Enfield Mark 6, 1924. Enfield won the contract, the military contracts from the British military in 1921, won them from Webley. So This gun up until 21 was produced by Webley, and then from 21 to 26, I believe, was produced by Enfield. Enfield made relatively few of them compared to the numbers that Webley was putting out, and as such, the Enfield made ones are a little rarer. That doesn't really reflect much in price. I found that $1,200 to $1,500 is pretty standard for the Webley Mark 6. And the primary differences between the Mark 6 and the previous variations is, for one, squared off butt of the grip here. Normally this would be, they called it a bird's head. It is kind of shaped like so. And then also the finish. They go with a duller finish for the Mark 6 revolver, and that was because they found that having a highly reflective gun in the trenches was not desirable. It drew attention to you, so a duller finish was adopted for World War I. In World War II, they weren't even duller yet, with basically a sprayed-on paint. And speaking of World War II, that is largely why the 4.55 went away. Was they found that soldiers, ones that were more or less untrained in the use of pistols, had a harder time handling the large 4.55 Webley cartridge versus what they found to be equally as effective in stopping power, the 38-200. So Webley then developed the Mark IV in 38-200, and then there was a whole interesting thing there where Enfield kind of swiped the design and a lawsuit happened, but then the war broke out. It's fascinating. We'll get into that more if we ever get a Mark IV, and we do have access to an Enfield revolver, the number 2 Mark I, so we'll be looking at that down the road as well. But man, I just love this gun. And like I say, in terms of the Mark VI revolver, the Enfield, in all but name, is in every way the exact same as the Webley. Parts interchange between the two. They're basically identical guns. So, yeah, it's wonderful. I want to shoot it some more. Let's go shoot it some more. So I'd mentioned that this gun was replaced in the Second World War by the 38-200 smaller caliber revolver, but these were still very popular in the Second World War. Don't make no mistake. These showed up all over the place, particularly in the Pacific, where it was found that, well, frankly, having a man running at you with a sword intent on gutting you alive, you wanted a bigger gun. So these tended to show up in the Pacific theater of war, especially as that theater became more notorious for the barbarism of it. The older Webleys in the larger caliber tended to come out a little more often. In World War I, as I said, pretty much only used by officers, but there were other instances like tank crews, air crews, and raiding parties would often be given these, like just for the event of a raid, like, you know, a trench raid where you go from your trench in like the dead of night and try and take out a machine gun nest or something before the official assault of the day began. So they did find their ways in the hands of soldiers from time to time in the First World War, but in the Second World War, it's pretty common. And also you had things like I'm trying to remember what they called it, Easter Rising or something of that effect, when in Easter, I'll post the year, but the rebellion in Ireland basically is what it is, and they continued being popular amongst British soldiers trying to suppress the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, all the way up until their service life ended. They were very common in that conflict and in that scenario. This is a double action and single action gun. It's interesting because it only clicks once. You got to pull way back for it to click initially if you're going for the single action, and it's easy to accidentally slip and just let it slide and go to the next round, which is an annoyance. And that's actually got something that was corrected kind of by Enfield in the Second World War with their number 2 revolvers. They actually cut the hammer so you could only fire it double action, partially for that reason, so you wouldn't have soldiers that were a little more green fumbling with the hammer. It was just point and shoot. So we're going to stick with the one-handed shooting. I'm going to fire the first 3 single action, then switch to double action. That is one thing. This thing has a really, really heavy double action trigger. I love that. Anyway, really heavy double action trigger. Very difficult to keep your point of aim on, and we're only about like 10, 12 yards from the target here, but the general use of this would be like, if there's a dude like here, you do that. That was more or less what they existed for. And one more mark that I forgot to mention. So this is your standard British mark of acceptance by the military, is this broad arrow. And you'll see there's what looks like double broad arrows here. That means that it was sold out of service. So in the 50s or 60s, when these guns were officially retired, they'd take your original broad arrow and they'd put another broad arrow facing it. I'm not pointing at the gun at my head. If you think I am, it is facing that away. So I know someone's going to try and comment that I'm pointing it at my head. I'm not stupid. So yeah, a lot of interesting things. This is just an awesome piece. I've wanted one for so long. I'd never actually seen one, especially not one that was unshaved. I think I'd seen one unshaved, or one shaved Mark VI a couple years ago, but I wanted the unshaved one. I wanted the original, be able to use the 455, which I finally got it. So happy with this thing. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you next time on Great Northwest Weaponry.